morning, everybody. It's a very nice day here in Arizona. The weather is great, 72 degrees. January 8th of 2011 was a much colder day. It was not much longer than 2 years ago that Gabby and many of the folks standing behind me got together here for a Congress on Your Corner event where their Congresswoman, Gabby Giffords, was going to meet and speak and hear from her constituents. Not shortly after the event started, a young man walked from inside this store, walked directly up to my wife, Gabby, leveled his gun, shot one bullet through her head, and then proceeded to go down the line, and in a little more than 15 seconds, fired 33 rounds, killing Dorothy Morris, Judge John Roll, Phyllis Schneck, Dorwin Stoddard, Gabe Zimmerman, and 9-year-old Christina Taylor Green, who was born on 9/11 and did not live to see her 10th birthday. I'd like to talk for a second about how that could have been different. It was clear that the shooter had a history of mental illness, but he had easy access to a gun. Admittedly, he purchased his gun with a background check. But if things were different, he would have failed that background check. Not only did he have a history of mental illness, but he had a history of drug use that the United States government knew about. But unfortunately, due to some failures in our system, it's often the case that records about drug use, mental illness, and even people's criminal background is not entered into the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. If that information was there, it's pretty clear that the man who did this at this Safeway on January 8th of 2011 would have failed that background check. But there's another problem. And the other problem is that he would have easily been able to go down the street to a gun show or on the internet to gain access to a firearm without being subject to a background check. So soon, coming up here in Congress, there is going to be a bill that's going to first go through the Senate Judiciary Committee, and then through the full Senate, and then hopefully through the House of Representatives, and eventually to the desk of the President, that requires a universal background check for all gun transfers and purchases, with a few exceptions. Now, Senators Jeff Flake and Senator John McCain are considering this legislation. And I think it's clear to them that 92% of Americans, 92%, that's a very important number, support a universal background check. We think that number is also near 90% for Arizonans. It's even, get this, it is even 74% of all members of the NRA support a universal background check before buying a gun. So it is clear that this legislation could do a very common sense thing to make it more difficult for criminals and the mentally ill to have access to a firearm. You know, Gabby and I are gun owners. We're strong supporters of the Second Amendment. I don't think you'll find somebody that's a stronger supporter of the Second Amendment than Gabby and I. We own firearms for the same reasons many Americans do. But this discussion is really not about the Second Amendment. It's about public safety and keeping guns out of the hands of the dangerously mentally ill and criminals. But I think you guys have heard enough from me I'd like to introduce a few of our fellow citizens who, unlike me, were here on that cold day on January 8th of 2011. And I'd like you to hear from about 5 or 6 of them. You know, first, Randy Gardner was here on January 8th. He was shot in the leg. He's a retired mental health professional. So he understands how important it is for the dangerously mentally ill not to have access to a gun. Another interesting thing about Randy is he also survived the shooting at Kent State. And he's not unique. You know, there are other Americans that have been at more than one of these horrific mass shootings. He recently traveled to Washington, D.C. to speak out for sensible gun laws. Randy Gardner.
Thank you, Mark. Today we call upon Senator McCain, Senator Flake, to support the wishes of the majority of Tucsonians, Arizonians, and Americans. We'd be proud if they took a leadership role in this, and we think that they're uniquely qualified, with Senator McCain being his long tenuring in the Senate, and Senator Flake being on the Judiciary Committee to get behind this legislation and move it forward for the American people. We advocate for a higher level of seriousness with gun ownership in respect to background checks. We currently live in a flawed system that allows 40% of gun purchases to go unchecked, and we believe that's unacceptable. Background checks are a minimal, it's the least we can do to make our community safer. It's an effort to prevent people that by their behavior precludes them from attaining a weapon. We are happy that the NRA membership has supported the background checks, the universal background checks. And we're a little dismayed by the leadership of the NRA that they continue to use rhetoric that is unproductive to going forward for a safer community. Law-abiding citizens will not be affected by these background checks. This is not a slippery slope. This is more a thoughtful walk across the level ground. If we do nothing, we will continue to see these same type of tragic events played out in our communities in America. We can't get into this attitude that we can't do anything. So really, in the end, we do this for each other. We do this to have a safer America. And we call on Senator McCain and Senator Flake to come forward and support this legislation and do the right thing. On a personal note, it's Mark, Gabby, Roxana, Emily, Mavi. It's been such an honor, and all the survivors, and there's so many I can't name them all, but I love you all. And it's been an honor to be around such good people and get to know you. And all the eyewitnesses that were here to this event. These people are the patriots. They want to see change in America. And I think they're not going to stop. They're going to keep going, and Tucson, America's better for it. Thank you.
Pam Simon was a great friend of Gabby's. She's a retired teacher. She was one of Gabby's staff members who, on January 8th, 2011, went to this Walgreens to buy Gabby a pair of gloves because it was cold outside. Pam, shortly after handing those gloves to Gabby, was shot once in the chest, once in the arm. She survived. Many folks did not. Since then, Pam has retired from her full-time job on a congressional staff, but has been very active in working with mayors against illegal guns. Please welcome Pam Simon.
It was just a little over 2 years ago that I pulled into a parking spot right over there. It was early so that I could help my friend and fellow staff member Gabe Zimmerman set up for the Congress on Your Corner. Mark's right, it was a day like today, only a little crisper, and that's what prompted us to go into the Walgreens and buy some mints. It was a beautiful day. People lined up and got ready for democracy in action. This is what should happen in this country. And it went terribly, terribly wrong. I saw a car pull in and Gabby hopped out, rushed up, we gave each other a hug. We laughed because we often end up wearing the same colors. And it should have been a day where all of these people gathered just to share their thoughts with their Congresswoman. Instead, it turned into a day of tragedy that should have been a wake-up call for this country. And everybody said at the time, something has to change. But they said it after Aurora. They said it after Wisconsin. They said it after the Sikh temple. And finally, we had the unbelievable carnage of 20 little children being killed. Is that the wake-up call we needed? I believe that we are finally going to have the action that we need to have. And so I join with my friends, Gabby and Mark, in calling on the senators to vote yes, to get this first step, this common sense legislation through our Congress. We know that background checks work. We know that 90% of Americans want background checks. And so this is a common sense first step. And I ask you all to help us carry our message to Senator Flake and to Senator McCain. Now is the time. Thank you.
Susie Heilman had a young neighbor, 9 years old. Her name was Christina Taylor Green. She had very high-minded ideals about service and democracy and deserved an entire life committed to advancing peace. Susie's here today. Susie brought Christina Taylor Green here to this event, this Congress on Your Corner. Christina's mom, Roxana Green, was just standing to Gabby's right. I think more than anything else, more than anything that happened that day, that's the greatest tragedy. Since then, Susie, who was shot multiple times, has been working with a organization that she started that provides mentoring from grandparents in schools to try to take, some steps to making sure that these tragedies do not continue to happen. Susie Hyman.
Just a little 2 years ago, 26 months ago, I picked up Christina in her driveway. She kissed her mom goodbye. She kissed her mother goodbye. And I brought her in my car. We parked right over there where the big van is, so that she could meet a role model. Or as Christina said, a role model who accessorizes. We looked at Gabby, and I looked at Christina, and I could only imagine the sparks that would fly when the two of them got to shake hands. This was really going to be something. It really was something, wasn't it? The civics lesson was turned into a nightmare. I lost a playmate. My friends lost their daughter. We miss her every day. Swiftly, every day. It's too easy to throw up our hands and do nothing. It's an intractable problem. It's divisive. The other side is too powerful. They have too much money. I have heard it all, and I am tired of listening. If we can save one life, if we can keep one family from feeling the awful, empty ache, if we can do something, and if that something is a common sense something, if that something is a responsible step, if that something is something that 90% of the people who are asked agree with, then I wonder what the problem is, people. I think it behooves us all to act. Not just to go home and nod your head and say, wasn't that touching? But to actually do something. We're here calling on our senators, our elected representatives, to act as our senators, to represent us, to remember what happened here, not to let it be a memory, but to have it be one of all too many calls to action, to take a responsible step towards making this country a safer place, a place where 9-year-olds can really get the chance to shake their congresswoman's hand, can have a chance to grow up and make the kind of change that Christina was telling me she wanted to make before the bullets started to fly. I urge Senator Flake, I urge Senator McCain to pay attention and to take common sense, responsible steps towards background checks, towards closing loopholes that exist in laws that somehow managed to get passed. And I urge all of you to leave here, to go home, and to do something. Don't just think about it. Act. Thank you.
There were a lot of heroes that day. First responders, Bill Badger, who standing to my left, who was responsible for tackling the shooter that day. Or Patricia Maish, who grabbed the second high-capacity magazine. There are also a number of folks that shielded others from this kind of carnage. One of them is a retired executive, Ken Darushka, who on January 8th of 2011 covered his wife to make sure that she was not killed in this horrific attack. Ken.
January 8th, a day that I'll always remember. When I developed my bucket list upon retirement, the one thing I never thought I'd do is put down getting shot as one of the items. But nevertheless, it happened, and I was able to shield my wife and protect her with my arm. Unfortunately, healing both physically as well as emotionally. But it's tough because not only does Tucson happen, but Aurora, Colorado, and all the others, and now finally Newtown just recently. And how many more will it take before we take some action? You know, all this started many years ago when President Reagan and Tom Brady were shot, and legislation was introduced at that point in time. And finally culminated in a bill that passed almost unanimously in both houses, the Senate and the House, by both Republicans as well as Democrats, after the Virginia Tech shootings. And that caused for background checks. But unfortunately, like with many of our laws, that's only the first step. Many loopholes were exploited in the years following, and that's to be expected. But if we go back to the early days of when our Constitution was developed, they didn't have a Second Amendment or a First Amendment or a 10th Amendment. Those were all missing. And they found 2 years later they had to go back to the drawing boards and develop 10 more amendments to fix what they didn't do the first time around. Well, that's the name of the game in Washington, is fixing things that are changing, are broken, and need to reflect changes in society, changes in technology, changes in the way we behave and act towards each other. That's what they do on a regular basis. They amend laws and change laws. This is what our government's all about. So we're asking them now to come up with a new law that would universally check all when they purchase a weapon. This isn't something that's foreign to any of us. Every time we go to swipe our Visa or MasterCard at a restaurant or at the Walgreens when we're buying some whatever, what do? They swipe the Visa card, and a background check is done to ensure that you have the right to purchase that and you're not a deadbeat and the card wasn't stolen. It's not a very difficult process. It's a process we all go through each and every day in our lives. All we're saying is let's do this and make sure that we don't have those that are mentally incapacitated, those that are convicted felons, those that are child molesters. They shouldn't have the right to obtain weapons. And when 40% of those are done without a background check at gun shows and other loophole areas like that, that's just not the way we ought to be living as Americans. We want to make sure that all of us, when we walk down the street, at least have the confidence that if a person has a gun, they at least know that they were entitled to have that gun and they haven't done something negative that would prevent them from having the gun. The only way you can do that is with the universal background. Now, a lot of people talk about our rights. Well, every one of those rights that are in that First Amendment, Second Amendment, through the Fifth Amendment, has qualifications. People forget what are the first two words of the Second Amendment. Well regulated. We never hear that. All we hear about is the right to own whatever we want to own. But it says well regulated. The First Amendment talks to freedom of speech. But there's a regulation. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater because that's common sense. And that's all we're saying. There's common sense regulations around each and every one of the bills that Congress has passed over the years. So when we talk about rights, I always want to go back and say the right of little Christina Taylor Greene to see her 10th birthday supersedes the right of anybody else to have an AK-47.
Emily Nottingham had a full career that spanned decades in Tucson city government. Her son, Gabe Zimmerman, followed in her footsteps and really embraced public service. Gabe was all about helping people more than anything else. He wanted to help people. Gabe now has the distinction of being the only congressional staff member ever to die in the line of duty. Since then, Emily has devoted her life to making sure that Gabe and the others here today and folks around the country that die daily from unnecessary gun violence have a voice. Emily Nottingham.
Hello. It's very hard for me to be here where my son was gunned down. Here where his body lies on that sidewalk for many hours, dead. But I'm here because I think that right now we have an opportunity to reduce the carnage that is swept across our country. You know, for a very long time, our society has already agreed that felons and people who have certain severe mental illnesses should not own guns. And we designed and implemented a criminal background check system to prevent them from having guns. But that system is riddled with holes, bullet holes. It needs to be fixed. It's not the only thing we can do, but it is one thing. So I call on Senators Flake and Senators McCain to not think about political posturing or political positioning, but to think about and act on public safety. Together, we can ensure that there are many fewer deaths of our daughters and our sons. Let's just do it. Thank you.
A couple months ago, Gabby and I started an organization called Americans for Responsible Solutions. Our organization is now a community of well over 100,000 members who are advocating for responsible and common sense changes to our gun violence laws. This is so critically important. And that's why we're here today. We're here to draw attention to this problem. We're here to let Senators McCain, Senator Flake know that we stand with well over 80% of Arizonans that are asking for universal background checks. Our organization is today releasing a letter to both Senator McCain and Flake, asking them to support this critical piece of gun violence legislation. You know, I think it's crazy that we have a system, as many of those who spoke about today, that will prevent a criminal or somebody with dangerous mental illness from obtaining a gun at a gun store. Like 1.7 million have been prevented since 1999. There have been 1.7 million failed background checks that have prevented criminals and the dangerously mentally ill from having access to a firearm. There is no reason that they have an easy option of going to a gun show or to the internet. How many of that group of 1.7 million criminals went to a gun show or bought a gun off the internet? I imagine there were many. And how many crimes, how many violent deaths could have been prevented if we would just do this very simple thing of closing the gun show loophole and requiring a background check every time somebody wants to buy a gun. I bought a gun recently. It takes 5 minutes. It's a small price that everyone should pay for making our streets, our communities, and all too often now, our schools from being a place of carnage and gross human loss. You know, another thing we lost on that day on January 8th, 2011, was a young, dynamic member of Congress, somebody who was able to get things done because she was a moderate. She was the person ranked right there in the middle of the House of Representatives, somebody that would consistently work across the aisle to make sure that we do the right thing in this country. And time again, Gabby did that. Because of what happened here on January 8th, as all of you know, Gabby, after about a year, resigned from Congress. But in the last 2 months, Gabby is back. She is back. She is back, and she is committed to doing whatever it takes to make sure that this Congress and this president pass and sign meaningful gun violence legislation, and to specifically make sure that right now we get a universal background check bill that, and I need to remind you again, that 92% of all Americans support, that 74% of NRA members support. There is no reason that we shouldn't pass this right now. You know, Gabby inspires me each and every day. Every single day. You know, often as she heads off to therapy, one of the last things she'll say to me is,
Fight.
she reminds me each and every day to deny the acceptance of failure. Well, Gabby has a message for not only Senator Flake and Senator McCain, but all members of Congress. I'm going to turn the podium over to my wonderful wife, Gabby Giffords.
Be bold, be courageous, please support background check. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming.
We have time for just a few questions. I know there's a lot of you, so if we don't get to everyone, please find us. We know how you can do that. So, first question.
Have you spoken to Senators McCain or Flake about background checks, and what was their response?
Well, as you may have seen, you know, Senator McCain, the Sunday after the State of the Union, was on Meet the Press, and he publicly supported universal background checks. And Gabby and I did meet with both senators, and we met privately with them. I am very optimistic, as is Gabby, that they're going to do the right thing and pass this legislation. So they're both supportive.
Yesterday, Senator Flake put out a news release and said he is not for universal background checks. He's for tightening up the NICS program, rather. He said that just yesterday.
Yeah, I didn't see that statement. Obviously, there are semantics, whether it's a universal background check, a universal criminal background check. I encourage everybody that's watching this today, especially if you're in Arizona, get on the phone, call Senator Flake and McCain, and tell them how important this is to them.
Right here, Sarah, right here.
Hi, I just wanted to ask if you're getting a sense of the public at large, if they're shifting thinking and pressuring their congresspeople across the nation to act in a way that hasn't happened before.
Well, you know, as Gabby and I travel around the country, we hear time and time again from people where they thank us for doing this. Over and over again. We need to make some changes and pass, you know, this legislation, meaningful, comprehensive gun violence legislation, including a universal background check. So I think there's a wave of support. Our supporters made 6,000 phone calls the day after the State of the Union, you know, demanding that something be done.
Anyone else?
Yeah, so this is the first time you guys have been back as a public event. What was it like preparing to return here and, you know, be in this type of forum again?
Well, this is not the first time that Gabby and I have been at this Safeway. We've been here a couple of other times on the one-year anniversary of Gabby being shot and 6 of her constituents being murdered and 12 other of her constituents and staff members being injured right here at this very spot. We came back 1 year after. You know, this doesn't take much preparation, and the reason is it's pretty easy to understand, and it's a pretty common sense thing that needs to be done. I mean, we can take some very easy steps to making sure criminals and the mentally ill do not have access to guns.
Bob in the back.
How will you know when you've won this battle?
I don't think it's a matter of winning and losing. You know, battle, I've flown 39 combat missions. You know, getting shot at probably about more than 30 times. You know, that's battle. This is policy, and this is a community and citizens standing up and asking their representatives to do what's right, to make our grocery stores, like we are here today, like a Sikh temple, like a movie theater, and off, as we see too often, a school, a lot safer.
Right here.
The shooter here, as well as in Aurora and in Newtown, used high-capacity magazines. Do you support future, you're talking about background checks, but how about the move to banning high-capacity magazines or assault weapons, which we use in Aurora and Newtown?
Yeah, so, you know, my 25 years of service in the military, I understand how, you know, how necessary it is to have a high-capacity magazine and an assault weapon when you're going to war, and how lethal they are, and how effective they are at killing a lot of people very quickly. I don't see any role for that in our society. But the thing that we can do right now, today, the thing that has momentum, the bill that can get through the Senate and then hopefully through the House, is a universal background check bill. Now there certainly might be some changes to that, amendments obviously, but that's the thing we need to focus on right now.
And in the back, last question.
Well, actually, I was going to ask you about that. Is there room, any wiggle room? And if so, what would that be? What would that look like?
Well, I don't know what it would look like, but legislating and passing something through the Senate and the House, it always involves some compromise. I expect that Senator McCain and Senator Flake, are talking to their colleagues now, and they're looking for some middle ground. So, I imagine that there are nuances to this that will be discussed. But it's really clear. I think it's clear to everybody standing here today, as Gabby and I travel around the country speaking to this very issue, it is very clear that most Americans, 92% of Americans, support a universal background check. So we should have that done immediately. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
We love you, Gabby.
I love you.